What's your
I
name?
mean, Chris Dennis Sayers.
Dennis
Dennis
Reyes.
and Doc.
And I'm one of the elders here.
All right.
But, yeah, it's very nice to meet you. So y'all are just visiting this?
Yes,
For the week.
Yeah, they're up.
Till then.
they live on Mercer Island,
Okay. And
so it's 20 to 25 minutes.
Yeah, yeah,
How
it's-
far that's, it's not.
yeah, it's,
Yeah, we're thinking, yeah.
an interesting place to spread out. Here.
So they worship here together?
Yeah, yeah.
That's where it's like where we're at.
Right.
Nobody, well, there's a few people that live in that town.
Tommy's older than I know.
There's, you know, we all kind of,
Right, there's not many clusters. But it is some wings across the every chance to everywhere, right there?
Yeah, they used to live in Renton, they were renting in Renton until they could get their house ready to move in.
Well, it's good to have y'all here. I think you're very smart.
excellent.
Welcome.
Caden, can you switch the slides on? Thanks, Ed. You cannot tell from the hoarseness of my voice. I have been battling a little bit of a sinus thing this week, and so I kind of try to keep my distance. It's not because I don't like you or you smell bad or anything like that. It's because I'm trying to keep you safe, whatever it is. So I do need you guys to kind of speak up here and help with this class because we are running on a little bit of a skeleton crew today. It is that time of year here in the Pacific Northwest where a lot of the school systems like have a week winter break. And I think it just gets in the culture here where people fly south, they fly to Hawaii, they go anywhere there is sunshine. And so we do have a lot of people out or traveling this today. So we are in Mark chapter 9, continuing our study of Mark's gospel in Mark chapter 9. Halfway through the book, we are getting to really the climax of the entire gospel story. And last week we kind of wrapped up class by looking at the Jesus making that prediction about his death and his burial, about his resurrection, and what discipleship is all about. And after that, after 6 days, Mark chapter 9 and verse 2, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain and was transfigured in front of them. Before we get too far into this, when he is transfigured, a couple characters appear with him. Who appears with Jesus when he is transfigured on this mountain? Elijah and Moses. Why are they significant? Why is this event so significant? It's particularly Elijah and Moses. The law and the prophets. Like, if we can put ourselves in their shoes just for a moment, you're talking about their George Washington and their Abraham Lincoln. Two guys who, in our American mind, are like heroes. Like just guys who are so important for their history. They represent the law and the prophets. And so these two guys appear with Moses and Peter. I love Peter for a lot of reasons because he says a lot of things that if I was there and I was present, I would probably say, because myself, maybe you're the same way, I have this tendency of putting my foot in my mouth from time to time. And Peter speaks up there in verse 5. Rabbi, teacher, it's good for us to be here. You know, Peter's right. It is good to be there. Let's set up 3 shelters. Let's set up 3 tents. Let's set up 3 tabernacles. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And I love verse 6 because he did not know what to say since they were terrified. Doesn't that summarize most of what Peter says sometimes? Like his biggest moments where he puts open mouth, insert foot. Moments come because he doesn't know what to say, so he just says the first thing on his mind. There's kind of like no filter in his mind. And as he's saying this, a cloud appeared, overshadowing them, and a voice came from the cloud. And what does this cloud, or what does the transfiguration reveal about Jesus? What does this entire account reveal about Jesus? What does the cloud say? What does the voice from the cloud say? This is my beloved. Have we seen that before? That Jesus is called the Son already in the gospel. Who has called Jesus the Son of God to this point? Go all the way back to the beginning when he's baptized and the heavens tear open. And the voice, this is my son. We see it again. Demons call Jesus the Son of God. The voice from heaven calls Jesus the Son of God. But think a little deeper here for a second. Can we think any other times in the biblical story where there's a cloud on a mountain? Can you think of any of the times? Moses on Sinai. That's interesting. Who's present at this moment? Moses is. It's really, really interesting. This voice, this cloud that's overshadowing, cloud comes down. The cloud in biblical story is often associated with the presence of God. We see that particularly in the Exodus account. And so this cloud comes down. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. Now here's what's interesting. If you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 18, Moses, when he's giving that law again to the people of Israel, all the way back in Deuteronomy, says there's going to come a day, there's going to come a time where another prophet's going to come, and when he comes, the word he uses is listen to him. That prophet has come in Jesus Christ. And as they're coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. And they kept this word to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. This is the disciples. We've kind of come accustomed at this point in the gospel for them wrestling and struggling to understand what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. They're in the back of their mind probably still thinking physical king, physical kingdom. But Jesus is going to rise from the dead and establish a spiritual kingdom. Yeah.
That God says, listen to him.
Yeah.
He's saying, look, Jesus has got authority. Heed these words. And it reminds me even to after Jesus is gone and he left his apostles, when Peter addresses in the first sermon and whatnot in Acts, heed these words, meaning this is authority.
Yeah.
This is a commandment. Better listen to this.
Yeah.
And back to Peter, what struck me is, though, yes, he put his foot in his mouth a lot, but he was always the first to kind of action. Jump
Yeah.
in before he realizes, he walks on water and then he starts to sink. But that characteristic, along with Saul's characteristic, both of them, Peter, the first part of Acts, and Saul, the second half of Acts, those two characteristics God uses.
Yeah. There's a lot. We love to give Peter a hard time. And I think that he deserves a little bit of a hard time. But at the same time, I do believe you're right, that Jesus spends his 3.5-year ministry, he sees Peter as a diamond in the rough. And he spends that 3.5 years polishing and polishing and polishing Peter to the point where on Pentecost, who is it the one that has the boldness to speak up and preach that first gospel sermon? That's not to say that Thaddeus or Andrew or somebody else wasn't bold in their own ways. But you needed a Peter. A guy who was bold to stand up and preach that first gospel sermon. I think Jesus saw that there in the heart of Peter. And I think that's one of the reasons Peter was chosen. And so the disciples are starting to curious, right? What's going on with this rising from the dead? Why did the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Elijah does come first and restores all things, he replied. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did whatever they pleased him, just as it is written about him. What's he telling them? He's talking about John the Baptist. John the Baptist has come. And immediately they come down the mountain, this moment where God has revealed himself in his glory in this cloud and said, this is my son. They come down the mountain, and what do we see in the disciples? The 9 that are down there, there's some faithlessness, right? They're not able to cast out this demon. Now go back in the Exodus story. Moses is on top of the mountain. He comes down. What does he see? Faithlessness. Yeah, disobedience. And so Jesus comes down the mountain. There's a large crowd, and the whole crowd saw him, and they ran to greet him. And he asked them, what are you arguing about? Someone speaks up. Teacher, I brought my son to you. He is a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and becomes rigid. Ask your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't. And how does Jesus respond? You unbelieving, you faithless generation. How long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him to me. And they brought the boy to Jesus. And the boy goes into convulsions. And Jesus asks, how long has this been happening? And they say from childhood. And many times it is thrown into fire or water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Put yourself in the shoes of the Father. And you've seen that demon try to take your son down into a body of water to destroy him, to drown him, or cause him to jump into fire to burn him to death. You're concerned. You love your son. You're begging. You're going to Jesus because no one else can take care of him. Jesus says, if you can, everything is possible for the one who believes. Really quickly, I want us to think about this question, though. Where do we see fear and confusion and doubt in this story? Or maybe even how do we see fear and confusion and doubt in this story?
The doubt comes in when you try to solve something by yourself
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
thinking about who can help you.
Yeah, they're trying. The disciples apparently, when we look at the entire story, especially down in verse 28 and 29, they're thinking that the demons are cast out by their own power. They're trying to solve the problem by themselves, and Jesus says there, it's like, you have to pray. This power needs God. So yeah, there's some doubt because they're trying to do it by themselves. What about fear? Do y'all see fear in this story? Yeah. Who's scared? The father. His son is possessed by a demon. That demon wants to destroy his son. Confusion. Who's confused in the story? Pretty much everybody. The father has heard all these things about Jesus and his disciples, and he goes to the disciples, and the disciples can't do anything. And in the back of my mind, I'm probably wondering, is all this stuff true? Is this stuff legend? Like, what if I've heard all these incredible things? So he's confused. The disciples are confused because they just went on a limited commission a couple chapters ago, and they did all these incredible things, and now they can't. What's going on? Just a couple months ago, we were doing some really awesome stuff. There's a lot of fear and confusion and doubt at this point in the story. And so Jesus saw that the crowd was gathering there in verse 25. He rebuked the unclean spirit and said to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. It comes out, and the boy became like a corpse, and they thought he was dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and raised him up. We see that Jesus do that from time to time in the healings, actually touch the person. Sometimes he just speaks, sometimes he touches, sometimes he speaks and touches. Anything you guys see all the way to verse 29 in Mark chapter 9 to this point? just kind of a couple big picture things to kind of connect the dots in Mark's gospel. One of the big themes that maybe you've noticed already in Mark's gospel is this struggle with belief. We've seen the disciples struggle with belief and what it means for Jesus to be the disciples. Here, this crowd is struggling with belief. You see that all throughout the Gospels. And so Jesus works this incredible miracle there in Mark chapter 9. And then in Mark chapter 9 and verse 30, they left that place and made their way through Galilee. And he did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after he is killed, he will rise 3 days later. Mark 8, Mark 9, and Mark 10 have 3 predictions of Jesus' death. This is prediction number 2. And once again, we see the disciples not understand what Jesus is saying. In fact, this time they are so frightened, they are so confused, they were afraid to ask Jesus anything. They're like, wait a second, he said this a couple weeks ago, but he was going to die on a cross. And I've always been told in the synagogue school that the Messiah was going to come and overthrow the Romans, and now Jesus is claiming to be the Messiah, but he's going to die on a cross. Something ain't matching up here. I'm confused. Their world is turned upside down. And one of the things about the 3 predictions of Jesus' death in Mark's Gospel, in Mark 8, Mark 9, and Mark 10, is there is this statement about his death, and it's followed by teaching about discipleship. Before we get to that teaching in Mark chapter 9, how does Jesus describe life in the kingdom? What is life? Yeah, Craig.
Humility is definitely part of it, and service is part of it.
Yeah, humility and service. You called it both. And we're going to talk more about this next week in Mark chapter 10. But Jesus there in the text brings a child. They're arguing about being greatest. Think about what Jesus just said. I'm about to die on a cross. What's their response? I'm confused. I don't understand. And as they're walking along, the disciples are over here just arguing about who's greater in the kingdom. And Jesus in verse 33, what were you arguing about on the way? Did anybody on road trips, those of you who are parents may remember this in your kids, your kids get in a fight in the back seat, arguing about something. You get to the rest stop. What were you guys arguing about? Nothing. In Texas, they would say when you get to the Buc-ee's. Because those of you who are familiar with Texas, Buc-ee's is incredible.
Hey, Austin,
Yeah.
you know, it's interesting, like you said a while ago, they still didn't get the understanding of this risen, you know, because like I said, it doesn't really talk about, you know, there's little hints of him dying and suffering. But you know, even the story of Daniel, when it, you know, in Daniel, when it talks about these kingdoms, and then here there's going to be a kingdom that's, you know, this stone that's hinged out of nothing, and it hits, it shatters those, and it becomes this mountain that encompasses the whole earth, and it's a kingdom that will never. And you know, they knew those stories, like I said, as you know, Jewish, you know, and they heard about the Messiah and all this, but they just didn't really, like you said, they thought, yeah, it's going to be a great kingdom. They always were thinking, you know, a heavenly kingdom. Not, you know, that's where the Pharisees were hung up too. Was an earthly kingdom.
And, you know, we have the benefit. One of the blessings of living 2,000 years later is we get the full story. Y'all, those of you, in fact, I think everybody here is old enough to know Paul Harvey. And what was his tagline? And now you know the rest of the story. We live 2,000 years later. And so now we know the rest of the story. We can look back and to be honest, there is a part of us that looks at the disciples and go, how are you missing this? That's what Daniel was talking about. Son of Man coming down, Daniel 7, his victorious, you know, all this stuff. But so often we allow our preconceptions, even today, to affect how we approach Jesus. They were allowing their preconceptions to affect how they viewed and approached Jesus. And one of those preconceptions was, as you pointed out, physical kingdom. That was something that was big for them, that they would once again have someone sitting on the throne of David. Big deal. Something they had looked forward to for hundreds of years. Because, yeah, Chris.
Well, I mean, a couple of things. So, first of all, I think it's interesting that he took Peter, James, and John, because what you have is a person who's ultimately going to be the first person to preach a sermon, the person who's going to write deep thoughts on love, and then the end of the end times
Yeah.
sort of structure, and then in the middle, the person who's martyred.
Yeah.
By not by Romans, but by Jews.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some weight in that, not enough weight to kind of look through that right now.
No.
But there's weight in that. The other thing is, in 32 it says, but they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask him. And the interesting thing is, it didn't stop them from following. I think sometimes people, when they get to a point in their spirituality, in their Christian walk, and they don't understand, they use it as something to abandon their faith. They go, well, I just can't understand. I just can't. But the thing is, they still follow. They still have confidence in the Messiah, even as they're working out things in Scripture, or in this case, in Jesus,
Yeah.
that they don't understand,
Yeah.
and they may not even agree with.
Yeah.
Well, none of them wanted the follower, the person they were following, the king, to be killed.
Yeah.
But that didn't stop them from following.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and then of course Satan, I think, uses those instances to diffract us from Christ and his mission. But you see an example here of just because they weren't going to stop following Jesus just because they didn't understand it at this particular point. They were going to find out, and they had confidence that Jesus was going to help them do that.
So a couple things. First off, great comments, Chris. Think about, and maybe even at home this afternoon, compare the description of Jesus when he's transfigured to the description John describes in Revelation when he sees Jesus. I think you'll find some similarities, perhaps. But second, I love the thought there that sometimes we're not going to understand some things. That's not a reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That when we come to a point in our faith and we don't completely understand, I'm going to throw something out there. The Trinity. We don't understand certain aspects, certain hard questions. That's not a reason for us to stop following Jesus. Continue to follow Jesus. And one of the things we see as the disciples continue to follow Jesus is those questions eventually get worked out. They eventually have a better understanding of Jesus and his kingdom, even if their understanding at this point isn't completely perfect. In fact, it's so imperfect there in the text that they're arguing about who's the greatest right after Jesus says, I'm about to die for you. Sometimes when you read about the disciples, and we've talked about this in the past, you read what they say and it just makes you want to bang your head against the wall. It's like, come on, dude, like, read the room a little bit. But Jesus grabs this child, this helpless, innocent little child, and says, whoever welcomes one little child such as this in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but him who sent me. The kingdom is about children and being like a child. In specific, we'll unpack the phraseology in verse 35 next week because it's very similar in Mark chapter 10. He goes on in 33 through 50 issues several teaching segments. And there in verse 38, John said to him, John, who is on the mountain of transfiguration, comes up to Jesus and says, Teacher, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he wasn't following us. Now pause for a second. Earlier in the chapter, what were the disciples struggling to do? Cast out demons. And now someone is casting out demons, and what are they doing? He's not one of us. Jesus, stop him. The irony here is just hilarious. But it does remind me of a story in Numbers 11, I believe this is it Numbers 11? Yeah. Numbers 11, 27 through 29. Numbers 11, 27 through 29, some people of Israel are starting to prophesy. And Joshua comes to Moses and says, Moses, these people are prophesying. I need you to stop. And Moses' response is, I wish everybody would prophesy. It's a very interesting parallel in the fact that the disciple, John or Joshua, comes to the master, Moses or Jesus, and says, get them to stop. And there's a teaching, a recorrection there. Verse 39. Don't stop him, because there is no one who will perform a miracle in my name who can soon afterwards speak evil of me. For whoever is not against us is for us, and whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name, because you belong to Christ. Truly, I tell you, he will never lose his reward. Now, note the contrast. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, this is an interesting verse for a lot of different reasons. Context plays so much into this, because you could, I mean, if we try to extrapolate things to today, I think we can go off in all kinds of different directions. But it shouldn't be lost in this particular case that they just come from being who's the greatest, and I think part of what they're bugged about is, well, there's people that, this is our gig,
Yeah.
right? Even though we couldn't do it, this was our show,
Yeah.
and he's gone, no, it doesn't work that way. And so, his name at this particular time is being glorified, and people who sincerely are glorifying his name share in that. Not only that, he says, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ. I think that's super important, because their reason for doing it is not out of Jewish hospitality. It's not out of any other obligation other than, oh, you're part of Christ, here.
Yeah.
And so there's this transition time that's taking place where the Jews are coming to this, and even though they are the apostles who've been chosen, it's not exclusive to them in terms of faith,
Yeah.
or in terms of proclamation, or in terms of being able to do things like cast out demons, because we aren't the center. Christ is the center.
Yeah. In fact, you kind of segue and you catch on some things we're going to see in the book of Acts. As the church explodes in the book of Acts, a lot of the times the reason the church grows so fast is not because of the apostles. It's because of average, everyday people who are doing things in the name of Jesus and preaching in the name of Jesus. Yeah, Kevin.
I was kind of just picking up some of what Chris was saying, because Jesus' statement is like creates a sandwich where he says, whoever does a mighty work in my name, and then he also ends the statement with whoever does, give the cup of water because they belong to Christ.
Yeah.
And because we can do mighty works, but they can be for other reasons. We do nice things and give cups of water to people, but they can be for other reasons. But I was thinking about how this affects like my attitude towards other people, because like a lot of times I struggle with the attitude of like I'm in the right church, like I'm following the scriptures, and so then when I look at other people who profess to be Christians and they're in denominations or in other religious organizations and stuff like that, and I think they're not doing things right. But I do think that there's a side to this of like what Jesus is saying is if they are doing this in my name, then they will not soon be able afterward to speak evil of me. Like if they are truly doing it in Jesus' name, they are going to come to him eventually. And I think that that's kind of what he's getting at with the disciples is like if they're casting out demons in my name, they're going, if they're not already with me, they're going to come to me. And I think it's really easy to have a harsh view towards other people, that we only get snippets of their life and say, well, they're not real Christians, or they're
Yeah.
doing things wrong. And it sounds like Jesus is kind of like, don't worry about that.
Yeah, and you guys are catching on some things you see there in the text. Verse 37, welcoming in my name, driving out demons in my name. I'm going to skip ahead just really quickly. To believe in me. Everything keeps going back to Christ. The Christ is the center of everything here in the text. And there's a reason for that. Because Christ is the foundation of our faith. And there in the text, and really contrast this there in verse 41. Whoever gives you a cup of water in my name, he has his reward. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to fall away, it would be better for him if a heavy millstone were hung around his neck and were thrown into the sea. As someone who is deeply, deeply scared of water and cannot swim, this is the absolute worst way to die. In fact, Jewish people in the first century regarded this kind of punishment as something the pagans may execute. It was a dreadful, awful way to die. The death without burial, including death at sea, was the worst kind of death. So Jesus is saying, if you cause someone to sin, it is better for you to suffer the worst kind of death. Think about what he said there for a second. And if your hand causes you to fall away, cut it off. That it is better for you to enter life maimed than to have two hands and go to hell, the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to fall away, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to fall away, gouge it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. What is Jesus teaching us about sin? What do Jesus' warnings about sin teach us or show us? Yeah.
Well, he's teaching us how severe sin is. And whatever it is, eliminate that from your life.
Yeah.
Because of
Yeah.
the consequences. But
Yeah.
don't take sin lightly.
Yeah. Sin is not to be taken lightly. Craig, what's going on?
Yeah, just going along with Jim, it's eternal consequences.
Yeah.
That's how serious it is.
Yeah, and because there are eternal consequences, don't take it lightly. Think about applications for us. I'm going to speak bluntly because we're all adults here. Porn usage among Christians is unfortunately not uncommon. A practical application of this would be, it is better for you to get rid of a smartphone and walk away with a dumb phone than to be able to access porn on your smartphone. It is better for you not to have social media than to get on social media and lust after other women. Yeah.
I'm gonna go a step further and say it's better for you to gouge out your eyes and not look at it.
Yeah.
He wants them to know the severity of this, that first of all, it is better, that it is better for you to die than to cause somebody else to
Yeah.
sin. Not only that, it is better for you to cut off an arm, poke out your eyes, do all this stuff
Yeah.
other than sin. That's the nature, that's because sin and Christ are diametrically opposed. And he wants us to take that, and he wanted them to take that, and he wants us to take that seriously. And I
Yeah.
think and I understand the example,
Yeah.
but I think we water it down, because
Yeah.
I think we can get rid of a smartphone.
Yeah.
All right, I can still lust in my heart.
Yeah.
I can still do all kinds of other things, or I can still look at things like,
Yeah.
he wants them to understand, and they need to understand the severity of sin to understand the blessing of grace.
Yeah.
And so if you don't understand the severity of sin, you're never gonna get your arms around the blessing and the love of the grace and mercy of
Yeah.
Christ.
So 2 thoughts as I'm thinking what you're saying. I love what you said, Chris. Two additional thoughts. I'm reminded, I think it was Augustine who looked at this text and its parallels in the Synoptics. Augustine was a 3rd, 4th century believer. And I think he, like, castrated himself or blinded himself. Like, he took this quite literally in an effort to avoid sin. You have to admire his willingness to go the extra mile to take that seriously. Sin is serious. And what Chris is saying, it kind of reminds me, there was a German theologian in the 1930s and 40s named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He wrote a book called Cost of Discipleship, which is a pretty solid, pretty good book. Obvious caveats for any man-made book. But one of the things he talks about that really sticks in my mind is costly grace. He says something along the lines of, if grace is cheap, then sin, it doesn't mean anything. If grace doesn't cost you something, then grace doesn't mean anything.
Cross and carry.
Yeah, pick up your cross. Yeah. Grace is costly. It cost Jesus his life, and we need ourselves today to be willing to bear that cross and to pay that price, whatever it may be. Gouging eyes, gouging feet, whatever it is. Jim, did I see your head?
Yeah, I mean, we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. I mean, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the class.
Yeah.
We have the Father, he says, help me with my unbelief. Okay, here we are as Christians, but I fail. And then we said Peter, the first one that put his foot in his mouth. But Peter is one of my heroes. If I could have the faith as much as we have the written revelation, we know what the kingdom is going to come with power, right? They're confused.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're a mature Christian. We fill ourselves with faith.
Yeah.
We all have room to grow. You know, Peter is an example. He failed, but I wish I could have half the faith as Peter, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus is saying is how he's warning us against sin. Cut it out. And that's what we're all going to strive through, and that's why it's a constant reminder throughout our whole Christian life
Yeah.
to stay faithful.
Yeah.
Well, that's the wow, right? The
Yeah.
wow is every time you sin, the fact that how offensive it is that God's grace can cover you from that.
Right?
That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. But if we don't understand the seriousness of sin, God's grace doesn't seem that great. It doesn't seem that amazing. If sin is just a typo on the school paper, it's putting the E before an I. Grace doesn't mean anything. But it's grace, if we understand the seriousness and severity of sin, then grace means something. Paul talks about that a little bit in Romans chapter 6. So yeah, he talks about all this stuff going on there in the text in terms of that. A couple of things really interesting. Go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted to kind of bring back to not that I think anything that was cited, like I disagree with it, but bringing back to the whole context of like this complete section of Jesus' teaching. And there's thematically been this kind of, I guess, contrast with unity and division. I mean, they're kind of fighting with amongst themselves. And I think the start, like in verse 42, whoever calls one of these little ones who believe in me to sin. And that kind of seems like that's in the context of like you're fighting amongst yourselves, and that leads others, like new believers, to fall away.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, personally in our,
Yes.
like, Amanda and I's lives, we've seen that over and over and over again. And for him then to go into this discussion about, like, if, you know, your hand causes you to sin, cut it out, and then he ends it with, for everyone will be salted with fire. Like, the fire is purging you of sin. And then he ends it with, have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. And so that's why I really think this whole section of teaching, like, the bottom line is so that you are at peace with one another. And there's other factors involved there, like, and that your lack of peace amongst yourselves causes other people not to come to the gospel.
Yeah.
And so we need to embrace this teaching to burn out the sin within us that causes us to be divisive and to fight amongst ourselves.
They're elevating themselves above one another. In the verse 33 through 37, they're elevating themselves against other people who are doing works. And so Jesus circles back, and I'm glad you caught that. It says, look, don't cause anyone to fall away. And you made a great connection and application for us. I'll tell a quick story because we have a little bit of time. I remember when I was growing up, at the church I attended, there was a lady who obeyed the gospel. I want to say she came out of Jehovah's Witness. And got rid of clothes that she deemed immodest. Like, she was making awesome strides, just doing whatever she could to follow Christ. But she wasn't growing fast enough. And so people looked down on her. And she walked away. She fell away. I think about that lady as you were making that connection. How easy it is for us to not be patient with young Christians, to little children, and cause them to fall away. There's a definite lesson for us as we work with young Christians.
And if I can add to that, when we are impatient with each other,
Yep.
even as the mature Christians,
Oh yeah.
then that the young Christians see that and that drives them away.
Yeah.
And I think we have seen that happen.
Yeah, yeah. That's another awesome connection there, an application, just because we're all at different stages of growth. There are parts, some of you who are farther along than I am in some things, and there may be some things maybe I'm a little farther along than you are. You know what? We need to be patient to one another, and we'll come around to a better understanding with time and study and humility, the kind of humility that Jesus is talking about here in the text, that we don't need to be fighting, as he brings up there in the text. Verse 50, be at peace with one another. We had a coffee shop study on the Gospel of Mark a couple of months ago, and I honestly struggled for the longest time. What's going on with 49? What's going on with verse 50? I think verse 50 is wrapping back around and saying, guys, that argument you're having about greatness, you've missed the point. Be at peace. The kingdom is not about personal self-exaltation. It's about suffering. It's about service. It's about humility. It's about making sure that you don't lead others to sin. It's about avoiding sin at all costs. And he describes and gives like a very vague picture of hell there in verse 47. The suffering that goes into it. Any final thoughts or questions on Mark 9? It is about a minute early, but we will wrap up shop there.